Hello and welcome to Guatemala's international documentary, explaining everything and anything you will need to know for business. First, let's cover the background information. Guatemala is located in Central America, bordering the North Pacific Ocean between El Salvador and Mexico, and bordering the Gulf of Honduras. It is slightly smaller than the state of Tennessee if you were to compare its size. The total landmass in kilometers is 108,889 square kilometers. 107,159 square kilometers of that is land, and 1,730 square kilometers of that is water. The amount of water allows Guatemala to have 2 shipping ports on the sea. The population in Guatemala is around 50 million people, with 36% of it being the ages of 0 to 14 years old, and the median age being 21 years old. In total, there are about 7,400,000 women and 7,200,000 men. To give you a visual, that would mean there's roughly 500 people for every square kilometer, making it the second most dense population in Central and South America. The fertility rate in Guatemala is the highest in Latin America, with an average of 5 children born to each Guatemalan woman during their lifetime, and a growth rate of 2.9% per year. Of that population, 2,280,000 are active internet users as of June 2012, which is 16.2% of the population. This will help companies that are looking at doing business in Guatemala what type of marketing is effective. There are currently 30 languages spoken in Guatemala, and while many are dying and some are growing, the official and primary language in Guatemala is Spanish, with 60% of the country speaking it. The second language that is spoken is Amerindian languages, with 40% of the population speaking those. The main religion practiced is Roman Catholic, then in decreasing order, Protestant, and indigenous Mayan beliefs, which is the native culture. A major and ongoing economic problem started in 1996 with the Peace Accords, which ended 36 years of civil war, removing a major obstacle to foreign investment. And since then, Guatemala has pursued important reforms in macroeconomic stabilization. The Dominican Republic's Central American Free Trade Agreement entered into force in July 2006. Spurring increased investment and diversification of exports, with the largest increase in ethanol and non-traditional agricultural exports. While this free trade agreement has helped improve the investment climate, concerns over security, the lack of skilled workers, and poor infrastructure continue to hamper foreign direct investment. The distribution of income remains highly unequal, with the richest 20% of the population accounting for more than 51% of Guatemala's overall consumption. In another recent article, it was told that according to the International Trade Union Confederation, Guatemala is one of the worst places to be a worker with no guarantee of rights. The country was awarded a rating of 5 by this confederation in its 2014 Global Rights Index, which rated countries from 1 to 5 plus according to how they protect workers' rights. According to the index, countries with a ranking of 5 are the worst countries in the world for workers to work in. Workers have effectively no rights and therefore exposed to autocratic regimes and unfair and abusive practices. In June last year, the ITUC also said that Guatemala was the most dangerous country in the world for the exercise of trade union activities. As of 2015, they estimate that at least 73 trade unionists have been killed in the country since 2007. Guatemala is home of many important and valuable natural resources that are cherished on the land. Some of these, and the most unpopular ones for business, include petroleum, nickel, rare woods, fish, gold, silver, iron, and hydropower. According to the latest WHO data published by Life Expectancy in Guatemala, males are likely to live up to 66 years old and females to 73 years old, with a total life expectancy of 69 years, which gives Guatemala a world life expectancy rating of 115. and as seen on this graph, it is just placed below Cuba and Latin America. The literacy rate of Guatemalans over the age of 15 is just 74%. This is the second lowest literacy rate in the Western Hemisphere. Because public education is not free, attendance is not high. 80% of enrollment is primary-age children, 30% are middle-aged children, and 10% are high school students. The rates continue to drop over time because of this, as seen on the graph, and is one of Guatemala's weaknesses. To show you some statistics about how badly their literacy rates are, or their education, in Guatemala, only 3 out of 10 children graduate from the 6th grade. The temperature in Guatemala is considered to be tropical, hot, humid in lowlands, and cooler in highlands. There are numerous volcanoes and mountains, with occasional violent earthquakes, as well as the Caribbean coast is extremely susceptible to hurricanes and other tropical storms. To give you an idea of the temperature there now, the average weather in June is 25 degrees Celsius. So now knowing some of Guatemala's background information, if Guatemala were your home and not Canada, you would die 9.93 years sooner, be 24.7 times more likely to be murdered, be 5 times more likely to die in infancy, be 42.25% less likely to be unemployed, make 87.7% less money, and way more. To understand Guatemala, it's important to understand some political information. In the late 19th and 20th century, the government survived because of foreign investments from wealthy countries like the United States. One successful company was the United Fruit Company, in which America ran and owned using Guatemalan bananas. Under the Guatemalan dictator George Ubico, the United Fruit Company gained control of 42% of Guatemalan's land and was exempted from paying taxes and imported duties. 77% of all Guatemalan exports went to the United States, and 65% of the imports to the country came from the United States, which is why America has so much control and say over the Guatemalan government today. In 1821, it became part of the Mexican Empire, which also explains why its second business partner is Mexico. Executive power is exercised by the government. Legislative power is vested in both the government and the Congress of the Republic. The judiciary is independent of the executive and legislature. Poverty and inequality and endemic in Guatemala are linked to the nation's other socio-economic problems, which include an inadequate education system, widespread health and sanitation deficiencies, and high rates of crime and violence. These issues have contributed to political turmoil in the past, and while Guatemala is no longer plagued by civil war, there is still great unrest and tension within the nation that could threaten political and economic stability in the future. The military is composed of the Guatemalan Navy and Air Force. Only men in between the ages of 18 and 50 are eligible to join. Most of the military is chosen voluntary, however, there is a small portion of a selective draft. They are responsible for border control and protection of their country. In 1999, a Guatemalan Truth Commission blamed the army for 93% of the atrocities and the rebels with 3%. For this reason, some people do not like nor trust the government and believe they're behind a lot of the crime and drug smuggling. These vast increases of drug and crime problems in Guatemala and the government currently play a large role as a political issue affecting business climate. Because of this, Guatemala's security has an increased watch and limitations to what enters and exits, as well to watch what businesses are actually doing, since many businesses are secretly behind this and involved. This makes business very hard and limits their potential for building relationships. To get a better understanding of Guatemala, you must understand the government formation. Guatemala has a constitutional democratic republic government with a civil law system. There is a president as well as a chief of state who is currently Otto Fernando Perez Molina since 2012 and a vice president who is Ingrid Roxana Baldet Elise since 2012 as well. Their elections run every 4 years. They must also be a native of the land and at least 40 years old, and they may not be re-elected. Voting is obligatory for literate men and women 18 years of age and older, and optional for non-literate citizens. Guatemalans have a fairly simple view on trade, but limited to many exporters. The United States, Latin America, and Europe are the most frequent destinations for Guatemalan exports for coffee, bananas, and sugar. Guatemala has consistently imported more than it has exported over the past 25 years, but this trend has sharpened over the past 5 years or so, with imports surpassing exports leading to trade deficit. In 2000, they signed a free trade agreement with Mexico, but it signed theirs with the United States in 2005, as they have been the strongest partners. Import duty and taxes are due when importing goods into Guatemala, whether by a private individual or commercial. The valuation method includes cost, insurance, and freight, which means that the important duty and taxes payable are calculated on the complete shipping value, which includes the cost of the imported goods, the cost of freight, and the cost of insurance. In addition to duty, imports are also subject to sales tax. Under the WTO, quotas are only for imports of rice, wheat flour, yellow corn, and apples. Quotas are activated only in the event of a domestic market shortfall, although Guatemala normally imports volumes greater than those bound. Guatemala has made significant progress in achieving macroeconomic and democratic stability after a 36-year civil war. The 1996 signing of peace accords, which ended 36 years after the Civil War, removed a major obstacle to foreign investment, and Guatemala since then has pursued important reforms in macroeconomic stabilization. They have improved economically and financially the most. However, there are still concerns and problems within the military. Here is some legal information. The process for making a law requires a presentation and 3 readings by Congress in 3 separate sessions. Then the draft law is passed to the executive branch for signatures and publication. After 15 days, the law is passed if the president does not veto. If that is the case, then the draft is final and the text is sent for publication in the Office Gazette, which takes 3 days. On the other hand, if the president uses the veto, then it can still be overturned by a 2/3 majority of Congress and is then sent for publication in Official Gazette. In the Guatemalan legal system, and in particular the justice system, there is lots of complaints and threats in regards to Guatemala having a judge or panel of judges to determine if guilty or not instead of a jury. This system is seen to be more powerful than even the US, which raises questions about fairness. The government receives so many threats from powerful people and gangs, and such that at times the judges wear masks to hide their identity during courts. Guatemala is rated one of the worst legal structures in the world due to their past history of involvement in organized crime as well. Many court cases also have been finished in a certain time and are restricted to time limits due to many bribes for judges and lawyers. 13.4% of children aged 7 to 14 worked in 2013. Guatemala made a moderate advancement in efforts to eliminate the worst forms of child labor. The government approved an action plan that outlines specific steps for government agencies to take from 2013 to 2015 to meet the goals set out in the flagship child labor policy, the roadmap towards the elimination of child labor in Guatemala. The government also increased its efforts to enforce child labor law by carrying out significant more inspections than the previous year, allocating additional resources to labor enforcement and rescuing 159 child victims of human trafficking. Guatemala allows and promotes foreign investments and includes provisions that guarantee property rights for all investors. There are no laws that limit foreigners to have a limit on the amount of a stock for a Guatemalan company except for telecommunication and transportation strategies. Guatemala follows the rules for the United Nations International Trade Law. Since the early 1970s, Guatemala has engaged in efforts to open markets by removing regulations limiting trade and free competition. Only prices for the generation and distribution of electrical service continue to be regulated by the state. The role of women in Guatemala has been changed due to the harsh reality of families being destroyed. Refugees, rural women, and especially indigenous women have been devastatingly affected and are forced to work regardless of horrible conditions, miserable wages, and exploitation. Additional challenges women face in Guatemala are the instability of the economy and their economic contributions. Yet, despite these obstacles, women-organized movements are struggling to make changes. Many women who work in sweatshops are young, teenage, single mothers, or widows. In order to get a job in a factory, women must often reveal whether they are pregnant, either through questions of job applications, interviews, or through physical examinations. Workers who become pregnant after being hired are often denied the full range of maternity benefits provided for in government laws. These women work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, in conditions lacking ventilation or restrooms. Physical and emotional effects go hand in hand in the workplace and at home for these women. However, well-educated professional women are accepted and highly respected. Many are owners and managers of businesses. Export and economic information. Guatemala has a mixed economic system in which the economy includes a variety of emerging private freedom combined with centralized economic planning and government regulation. Guatemala has one of the lowest GDP per capita of the Americas. The main sector of the economy is services, which accounts for 60% of GDP. The growing tourism industry is one of the major sources of income. The GDP per capita in Guatemala is equivalent to 19% of the world's average. The growth rate for GDP is 3.7%, and the GDP per capita for US dollars is $3,477. Guatemala's importing partners are United States for 37%, Mexico with 11%, China with 7.8%, and El Salvador with 4.4%, and Colombia with 3.6%. Some of these imports are refined petroleum with 17%, cars 2.5%, packaged medications 2.4%, delivery trucks 1.8%, and broadcasting equipment 1.6%, with many others, but with these being the main. Their exporting partners are the United States 44%, El Salvador 9%, Honduras 6.5%, Mexico 5.5%, and Costa Rica with 3.8%. These exports include coffee for 9.7% of them, raw sugar 9.1%, bananas 7.1%, gold 5%, and precious metal ore 5%. Guatemala unemployment rate is at 4.10% compared to a 3.5% of last year. This is higher than the long-term average of 2.58%. Many of this is because of the inequality and treatment of the workers. In Guatemala, their money is called quetzal. One Guatemalan quetzal equals 0.6 Canadian dollars, or vice versa, 1 Canadian dollar equals 6.25 Guatemalan quetzals. In relation to the balance of trade with Canada, Guatemala is benefiting from a $55,660,381 profit, with 1.47% of its exports going to Canada and only 0.55% of its imports are from Canada. With this being said, consumer prices in Canada are 54.43% higher than in Guatemala. So, if looking at this chart, you can see that in Guatemala, milk can be 11.86 quetzals, which is 1.89 Canadian dollars, but in Canada, it's $2.07. Or, if you look at eggs, it can be $2.43 in Canada, and in Canada, it's $3.28. On top of all the food, Guatemalan in the 21st century found more minerals of being natural resources, including nickel, which had once been export product, but mining in the country was focused on iron ore, lead, and gold. An increasing number of open-pit mines to extract gold and silver deposits have been established in the western and northern eastern regions of the country. The creation of these mines has sparked criticism and protest from neighborhood indigenous communities and international human rights, in some cases necessitating military intervention. In Guatemala, the inflation rate measures a broad rise or fall in prices that consumers pay for a standard basket of goods. The inflation rate in Guatemala was recorded as 2.58% in April of 2015 and 3.865 years before. Canada exported a total of $105 million worth of goods in 2014 to Guatemala, with top products exporting being paper and paperboard, mineral fuel, fertilizers, fats and oils, and machinery. Imports from Guatemala reached $507 million, with main imports being fruit, coffee, orange, sugar, apparel, and vegetables. Guatemala's economy for households on average are lower middle income. 31% of household heads interviewed are incomes below 500 quetzals, 51% below 1,000 quetzals, 11% or below 1,500 quetzals, and only 7% having incomes of more than 1,500 quetzals per month. Cultural information is very important and should be noted for this country. When getting into business in Guatemala, it is appropriate to always greet with a Spanish word, but then follow with the regular English. Business language should be done with English, also on cards, but with a translation of Spanish. Some topics to avoid are the politics or the violence since 1978. However, some good topics are about the Guatemalan geography, history, and culture. When sitting down, male guests sit to the right of the host and women sit to the left. Upon meeting someone, greet the person with a handshake. Those who have attained a good level of trust may occasionally kiss each other on the cheek, which is more common between women and somewhat less between men and women. Between men, trust is displayed by a hug. In the workplace, the use of gestures depends on the trust and degree between the individuals, but usually a firm handshake, big gestures, and direct eye contact, and showing emotions on one's face or in public displays of affection are the norm. However, raising of the voice is seen as rude or aggressive and should be avoided, although they do still like humor. Guatemalans wave goodbye using a gesture that looks like the Canadians. Guatemalan humor is more racial and geared towards the bigger countries such as America. Although the Guatemalans like laughing and having a good time, these particular humors should be avoided. When a man is greeting another man, they usually shake hands warmly and maintain direct eye contact. Friends and close acquaintances will share a hug combined with a few slaps on the back. When a woman is greeting another woman at a first meeting, women shake hands or give a light touch on the forearm. Friends and close acquaintances generally kiss each other on the cheek. When a man is meeting another woman at a first meeting, a regular handshake will do. Friends, family, and close acquaintances may share a light kiss on the cheek. In Guatemala, when you are greeting each other, you usually say mucho gusto, as this is viewed as the proper way to greet. Another polite greeting is to say buenos dias or tardes, which means good morning or afternoon or evening. Food is an important part of Guatemala's customs and culture. 3 meals a day is the norm, with the largest meal being lunch. Also, when 2 men or 2 women stand beside each other, they usually stand very close during conversation. When a man talks to a woman, the distance is generally greater. Do not cross your arms. It will be taken as an indication that you are bored or uncomfortable. Many Guatemalans will look around instead of maintaining eye contact, though, when speaking, but this is not meant to be rude. If you are invited to a Guatemalan's home, it is likely that his wife will serve everyone first, even if there are servants, and then will be seated herself. Unless you are attending a meal served in a household from the privileged class, and observes European-style customs, all the food will be served at once. If the meal takes place in a private home, bring a small gift to indicate your appreciation. However, do not bring a gift of food. Your host will think that you do not appreciate the food they have prepared, or that you consider the woman of the house an indicate. If you are invited to a restaurant, your host will pay. It is appropriate to offer to pay for your part of the meal, but your offer will be politely declined. Reciprocate your host's hospitality with an invitation of your own sometime afterward. Guatemalans value relationship building and harmony, so it is important to avoid hard selling, pressure tactics, and any sort of conflict or confrontation. They usually use and respond best to indirect communication style over direct. Decisions are usually from the top down and can be lengthy before they are reached, so it's important to maintain patience. Once again, direct eye contact is an important way to show interest in what the speaker is saying. Guatemalans value relationship building and harmony, so remember that relationships come first over business sometimes in Guatemala. Titles are very important, and it's best to address people directly by using their professional title or Mr., Mrs., or Miss, followed by the surname in Spanish. Arriving on time for a meeting is important, as Guatemalans tend to be quite punctual in business situations. You should tip the same amount that you would in Canada if you go to a restaurant, which usually happens, as Guatemalans like a social scene. Gifts are given in a business setting, but not mandatory for the first time meeting. Breakable gifts are not essential because of the amount of earthquakes, nor white flowers, as they represent a funeral. If invited to the home, you should bring flowers, but not white, candy, and something for the children if they have them. They also like wine, spritzers, chocolate, or something from Canada, but not clothing or anything cheap. It should not have your company logo on it or something from their country, as this does not show any thought. Some of the major national holidays and ceremonies in Guatemala are similar to Canada. The holidays include New Year's, Easter, Labor Day, Army Day, Independence Day, Revolution of 1944, All Saints Day, and Christmas. Some major events include the Semilla de Diablo and the Maya. Specific products and services associated with significant cultures and holidays include the woodcrafted products, including traditional marks, carved squash gourds, and colonial-style doors and furnitures. On November 1st to 2nd, Dia de Tablos los Santos, also known as All Saints Day and Day of the Dead, you usually see wild horse racing involved with much alcohol in Todos Santos, Cuchamac. Flying of giant kites in this area too is mostly seen. On December 7th, burning of the devil is something that all Guatemalans know about. All over the country, they take everything burnable, such as waste paper, old household items, etc., and outside their houses set it on fire to cleanse their households for the whole weeks to come. On December 13th to 21st, tribute to Santo Tomas. Its culmination is on the 21st with fireworks and people swinging from a rope around a central pole, known as Pola Valdono. The problem with trade in Guatemala is that there are some cultural issues. One of them being there are two groups, the man and then there's the rest of the Guatemalans. Mans believe that natural resources should not be traded, and they believe that they should protect them on their land. These Mans are usually in the highland region of Central America, but they do interfere when they cross borders, and then that's when natural resources fights between the two groups comes into conflict. And last but not least, there's international information. Guatemala is a membership in international organizations, including the WTO, the UN, the World Bank, the Dominican Republic Central American United States Free Trade Agreement, which is also called the CAFTA-DR, WHO, and GATT. There are many more, but these are the main ones. The roles they play in these include supporting the institutional democracy, encouraging respect for human rights and the rule of law, supporting broad-based economic growth and sustainable development, and maintaining mutual beneficial trade and commercial relationships, including ensuring that benefits of all the Casta DR reach all sectors of the Guatemalan population. There's also the part where they have to cooperate to combat money laundering, corporation, trafficking, alien smuggling, tariffs, and other transitional crime, including through program funding under the Central American Regional Security Initiative. And lastly, supporting Central Americans' integration through support for resolving of border/terrestrial disputes. Guatemala has a long-standing claim to a large portion of Belize. The territorial dispute causes problems with the United Kingdom and later with Brazil following its 1981 independence from the UK. In December 1989, Guatemala sponsored Belize for permanent observer status in the Organization of American States. In September 1991, Guatemala recognizes Belize's independence and establishes diplomatic ties, which acknowledge that the boundaries remain in dispute. In anticipation of the effort to bring the border dispute to an end in early 1996, the Guatemalan Congress ratified two long-pending international agreements governing frontier issues and maritime rights. Guatemala has some, but very few, foreign relations with many countries. The relation between the United States and Guatemala traditionally has been really close, although at times strained by human rights and civil/military issues. Because of the Belize and territory dispute, they usually have a lot of problems and don't get along with the United Kingdom as well as the Belize themselves. As well, Guatemala joined Honduras and El Salvador, which are the two places beside them, in signing a free trade agreement with Mexico as well in 2001, which creates a closer bond between those three places as they usually get along fairly well. Some key points about infrastructure should be noted as well. Many of the transportation in Guatemala is ran under the government. This means that any shipping of anything has to be approved by them first. In regards to the climate, many of their natural resources and the products that they export to make a lot of money are food and products that depend on the climate. So depending on the year and the climate, their crops might not grow so well, which means they might not get as much money. And then when you take into consideration hazardous climates and earthquakes, that also causes a lot of problems, as these earthquakes can happen in volcanoes that destroy the transportation routes. Since Guatemala is poor as well, this makes it really hard on them financially, as they cannot afford to repair this in time for transportation. Guatemala also has a lot of ethical issues that can be affecting its trades with other companies. Failure by Guatemala to effectively enforce its labor laws has occurred in a manner that's affecting trade between the other parties. In relation to the United States, in these proceedings, the United States has shown that Guatemala has failed to effectively enforce its labor laws through a sustained and recurring course of inaction in a manner affecting trade between the parties. The International Trade Union Confederation comments that the ILO has taken note of Guatemala's failure to ensure compliance with restatement orders by Guatemalan employees over the course of several years, and now are on warning. If Guatemala does not fix their trade union rights, they can be at risk of losing a lot of connections with their trading partners. This then leads to the topic of competitive advantages. Canadian companies state that they are very interested in operating a free trade zone with Guatemala and many other companies, as this can benefit from the agreement and access other opportunities in the Central America. Canada and Guatemala maintain strong diplomatic ties and growing trade relations. And even though Guatemala and Canada have maintained a stable commercial relationship over the years, there is considerably room to grow. Guatemala is Canada's second largest trading partner in the Central American region. Despite the 2008 world financial crisis, The trade has increased, reaching $656 million between each other in 2014. Canadian exports to Guatemala consist mostly of machinery, potatoes, fertilizers, and electronic devices, while Canadian imports from Guatemala consist of sugar, textiles, nuts, vegetables, and fruits. Recently, there has been interest in diversification of trade, especially towards new products, such as green and sustainable products and technologies. Both Canada and Guatemala are open to continuing negotiations of a bilateral free trade agreement and parallel agreements on labor and the environment. Although Canadians do feel very comfortable in Guatemala, some Guatemalans feel that they do not like some Canadians. This is because Canadians buy a lot of products from Guatemala that are used and made with child labor. Because of this, a lot of Canadian companies were getting heck for doing a lot of these agreements with either clothing or food companies, and then now Canada has No Child is to Work campaign that they advertise with their products when they're selling them in Guatemala to hopefully regain their customers and respect. Two countries that you compare Canada's trade with are Mexico and Guatemala, as they are both nearby and very similar. However, when it comes to coffee, Guatemala is one of the top 3 countries supplying raw coffee to Canada. Even though this is a good advantage for Guatemala, Mexico does have a very good free trade agreement with Canada, which means that they do export more and import more from each other more than Guatemala. Then going back to Guatemala, however, their dollar value for trade is much cheaper. However, they do have to transport everything more, and they do have less than Mexico does in products. So with this being said, Guatemala is a growing economy, and Mexico has a lot of history with the United States and Canada, making it a stronger trading partner. However, they cannot beat Guatemala's coffee.